for that, but same time, same day that we generally meet. We have had a request from Dr. Robinson that we just change the agenda so that we put the Crown Act language first. So many thanks to Ms. Honeycutt and Mr. Cook for abiding by the bump that we didn't know was going to happen. And before we get started, is there a motion to approve the minutes from our April 23rd meeting?
So moved.
Second.
All right, we have a motion by Mr. Hershey, a second by Chair Haggerty. Any discussion? All right, hearing none. All in favor of approving these minutes, please vote aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? All right. So we're going to start with the Crown Act language, and I do have a request, Dr. Robinson, as we're waiting. Can we start with the employee policy first?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So, Committee Chairman Haffey, Vice Committee Chairmen, and Board Committee members, as you're aware, the Crown Act is a pioneering piece of legislation that seeks to eliminate hair discrimination in workplaces and schools. This law specifically prohibits the unfair treatment of individuals based on their natural hair textures and protective hairstyles. These styles are often worn by African Americans and are deeply rooted in cultural, ethnic, and personal identity. During the Policy Committee meeting on March 12th, staff brought the Crown Act legislation to the Policy Committee for discussion. As a result of the dialogue and discourse, staff was directed to draft Crown Act language, which you will see incorporated in 3 policies for revision and consideration. Dr. Kramer will share the Crown Act draft language incorporated in Policy 4316, and Ms. Hill and her team will share the Crown Act draft language incorporated in Policy 7340, employee dress code and appearance. Dr. Kramer will also share the Crown Act draft language captured in Policy 1710, 4021, 7230, prohibition against discrimination, harassment, and bullying. So to start us off, Mrs. Hill will go ahead and bring that language to you, which is captured in Policy 7340, employee dress and appearance.
Good afternoon, board members and Madam Chair. We are, as Dr. Robinson said, we brought to you Policy 7340. This policy is actually part of the migration, and we brought it forward so that we could address the Crown Act matters as a part of the migration. So the base policy does come from the School Boards Association manual. Once adopted, this policy will replace our current policy 2304/3004/4004, which deals with faculty and employee dress. We have gone through the policy and incorporated some of our language from our original policy into here, and then also made some modifications with regard to some of the Crown Act language. In the first paragraph, we make it clear that, and repeat out of our Code of Conduct policy, that employees are to be role models and to serve as models for the students and for our community. And then within the language, we make it clear that employee dress must not disrupt or distract from the educational process or the work environment, and have to be in accordance with standards. And then in Section 8 here, guidelines for employee dress and appearance. This indicates that the superintendent or designee will develop and communicate guidelines, and we've added in here some of the factors that we thought were important in addition to some of the things that the School Boards Association laid out. So must be gender neutral and non-discrimination, must permit protective natural or cultural hairstyles, including but not limited to hairstyles such as braids, dreadlocks, locks, twists, tight pulls or curls, cornrows, bantu knots. The rest of these are similar to and consistent with what is in the draft student policy. In Section 3, we make it clear that there may be deviations from the guidelines for employees who may be performing specialized duties that require different forms of dress, and that dress must comply with any health and safety guidelines for a specific position. And finally, that we must offer reasonable accommodations when necessary for employees. We also included some language in here that if there are any deviations because of specialized duties or restrictions, related to health and safety, that they must be consistently applied without regard to race or ethnicity or some other protected status. Additionally, it makes it clear that principals or supervisors may develop additional guidelines with regard to their school or department as long as they are consistent with what's described here in the policy. And we moved up this language saying that supervisors and administrators should encourage employees to dress in accordance with the board standards. Section B here lays out what happens when a supervisor needs to address violations of dress and appearance guidelines, and with the supervisor considering specific factors in terms of determining whether an employee's dress is consistent with guidelines or it's not. And with those factors, you'll see that we marked out some factors that seem to take into account what outside standards were or outside entities, and just left some of the other standards that we thought were important with regard to what our employees would be doing, nature of work, professionals, health and safety, contact with the public, which could influence what you're wearing, interaction with students, and any other guidelines that we have established. So if the supervisor decides that the employee's appearance violates the guidelines or policy requirements, they'll talk to and counsel the employee with regard to the attire and determine whether the employee should stay at work or needs to leave based upon their dress or attire. And then repeated violations or blatant violations could subject an employee to disciplinary action.
Thank you so much. And Ms. Hill, I know you sped this up. This was going to be later in your migration process, so I thank you for your work on this and putting this ahead in your timeline. Certainly understand that sometimes the board can throw a wrench in those migration plans, or the General Assembly.
It's our pleasure to do what the board needs us to do, so no problem at all bringing this forward now.
Are there any questions, comments, concerns with 7340 employee dress and appearance? Ms. Caulfield?
I'm just curious, I guess both in the first paragraph and in G, when we crossed out words like a good example of personal appearance, and in the first paragraph, the appearance and conduct of the facility, why did we cross that out?
So you're talking about the sentence that we crossed out at the very beginning?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just saying, like, I feel like, you know, our teachers are their role models and lead by example, so I'm just wondering what the purpose was for taking out, to point out that they're leading by a good example.
We did that only because we added in that very first sentence that's underlined, which comes from our policy, and because it seemed to be repetitive, we just decided to use that language that we use throughout our policy language about our employee responsibilities and code of conduct language. So that's why we took that out of there. It certainly can be brought back in if that's the board's pleasure for that to remain in there.
Motion to move the first reading.
We have a motion to move this policy to first reading.
Second.
Are there any other comments or questions before we go? All right, we have that motion from Mr. Hershey, second by Ms. Edmonds. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, thank you very much. So now we move to, where are we going, Dr. Robinson? Students?
Yeah, we're going to go ahead and shift to 4360.
Okay.
So, and I also want to draw some attention to the fact that we're bringing the three of these together as a bundle. So there's one précis and one approval for the three rather than handling them each
Oh, thank you, Dr. Crane.
individually.
All right.
So that they're all together.
All right, will you hold our motion, or we'll just do?
Or you can split them up if you want. It doesn't matter.
Okay.
I just wanted to explain
All right.
sort of that difference. But all right. So for policy 4316, our student dress code, we have added some language in section H, as well as the first sentence or the last sentence above that section and paragraph. All of these are on page 2 of the policy, and we corrected a misspelled word. I learned that there are 2 ways to spell discreetly. Thanks to Neil. Never too late to learn some things like that. So thank you, Neil, for catching that. So there's just a misspelled word correction in the following paragraph about enforcement. So the language reads that students are free to adopt hairstyles of their choice, whether short, long, shaved, braided, curled, twisted, knotted, or otherwise. In particular, schools must permit protective, natural, or cultural hairstyles, including but not limited to such hairstyles as braids, dreadlocks, locks, twists, tight curls, or cornrows, bantu knots, afros, gilets, and other culturally expressive hair ties or head wraps. Schools may impose restrictions on student hairstyles only when strictly necessary to comply with specific health or safety regulations in light of unique hazards in a particular context. For example, physical education classes, science labs, wood shop, or similar activities, or when otherwise required by law or board policy. In the rare cases when such restrictions may be appropriate, they must be applied consistently without regard to race, ethnicity, or other protected status. Differential treatment of student hairstyles because of the hairstyle's historical association with a particular race, ethnicity, or other protected status is strictly prohibited as discriminatory under Board Policy 1710. And we did bring a revision to Policy 1710 for you to consider in conjunction with this.
So, Ms. Johnson-Hostler, Mr. Swanson, and I had a conversation prior to this meeting with Mr. Ramey and Dr. Crane and Dr. Robinson, where we discussed this particular paragraph. And while I think we agreed on similar ideas, we had different ways of coming to the same conclusion. And so I did want to share some of the information that I heard from Mr. Swanson and Ms. Johnson-Hostler. I know this doesn't encompass everything, but I also found that having it on paper rather than talking about it in a nebulous is sometimes easier. So I've got some of these.
Just one thing, I just want to make sure that you were aware that after the conversation, we did substantially revise the language here. So what was discussed on the call earlier, the feedback, what I heard was that there was concern that the exceptions could be too amorphous and that there's some bias could creep into the application of the policy. So what was originally shared, that where we got feedback, was much looser. And so what we've changed since then was to say that any exceptions to the general rules have to be strictly necessary to comply with specific health or safety regulations in light of unique hazards, meant to tighten that up. So I hadn't seen this previously, but that was our effort to tighten up after the feedback we received on the original draft.
Okay. So I just want to, again, I think everything that Neil just stated is still here. It's just sometimes we need to chunk things a little differently. So, and the part where it talks about in the stricken, or in H, where it talks about the exceptions for students may impose restrictions on student hairstyles only when strictly necessary to comply with specific health or safety regulations in light of unique hazards in a particular context, with the many examples, or when otherwise required by law or board policy. The suggestion we had was to strike that and then to just put under E, clothing and hairstyles must be suitable for all scheduled classroom and extracurricular activities, including physical education, science labs, wood shop, and other activities where unique hazards exist, rather than having the hazard language reiterated twice. And then in the next section of that struck portion of Part H, where it starts with, in the rare cases where such restrictions may be appropriate, they must be applied consistently without regard to race, ethnicity, or other protected status. Differential treatment of student hairstyles because of the hairstyle's historical association with a particular race, ethnicity, or other protected status is strictly prohibited as discriminatory under Board Policy 1710. We have a section following H, there's enforcement and then applicability. And it's a little redundant where it says it kind of twice, but putting that under the applicability piece. One change that Mr. Swanson recommended was to add hairstyles under protective and natural. And we had a lot of questions about what Jaylee is. It's a very intricate head wrap. I had to Google it. And so we thought maybe just, since it's not well-known, to take that out, but we're also open to leaving it in. And then Ms. Johnson-Hausler, this one is not in there, wanted us to add the language Crown Act specifically, so if somebody searches for it, they can find it in the policy. So try to figure out where that would go. Did that sum up what?
It does. And my recommendation, Neil, again, as you heard me say on the call and I've said here, I appreciate the work, but I feel like if we don't use the words Crown Act anywhere, it rids us of the entire intent and spirit of why we're doing this. So that's important to me. I own that's my personal opinion here. So I'm flexible, whether it's our table of contents, but I want people to know that this was important to us as a board. And we had unanimous support. All 9 board members were at this table to support that. And to not acknowledge it in our policy, for me, feels like we didn't listen to what a unanimous board requested. So it's not there, so my request is that it either be in the table of contents or an appendice. I'm actually fine with even noting it in the section that we just read at the beginning to acknowledge that this really is changing because of the Crown Act, not because we were very smart and thought we should do this. But this really is based on a lot of work that African Americans have put into this policy.
And I think it would be, we could certainly try to think of somewhere to add the word Crown Act. Just want to make sure everyone's aware there is no Crown Act in North Carolina, right? There's a bill that's languishing in
But
committee.
black people know that there is, and therefore, when they Google search it, I want them to be able to find it.
So like maybe putting it in somewhere, I would think maybe in the references or something, so it turns up in a search. I just wouldn't want the policy to recognize an act, which isn't really an act. It's a bill that's probably not really.
Correct.
Mr. Swanson and Mr. Haggerty.
I just want to lift up and say I agree with what Vice Chair Johnson-Hoffman has stated, and I do think Section H, it could be the Crown Act with some language or a link that talks about what it is, and in addition to having it in the reference. So I think it needs to be in both places, because again, I think it's needed, it's in the right spirit, and I also think that not acknowledging that is a disharmony. It's essentially a harm to students who are being discriminated because of their hair, and staff.
So I might be coming into it late, and so if it's a dumb question, call me out on it. But I remember in our previous discussions, we had originally approached this as having a policy that was very specific to the Crown Act, but the thought was that when people look at discrimination policies, dress code, they might not cross-reference it, and so we wanted the Crown Act language in all of these individual policies. Was that?
I could speak to that if you would like.
Or
Go ahead, please go ahead.
Go for it.
When the question was initially asked, I began to look around where the language had been incorporated. Because the act has not been passed in the state of North Carolina, nor has it been passed by our federal bodies of legislation, some states have adopted the language, but other municipalities locally have incorporated in their anti-discrimination policies. So that's why we began to look at inserting it in other places.
Okay.
Because it doesn't exist as an act in North Carolina, and it has not been passed at the federal level. It is recognized, and we can reference it as other resources. It can't be a legal reference because it's not a legal document in the state of North Carolina or in the United States. Other states have, but other municipalities have adopted it in their anti-discrimination languages and their ordinances, which is how we were attempting to follow that model of adopting the language.
then I think that cuts off what I was wondering, which was, could you actually have some standalone language and policy about respecting or upholding the principles of the Crown Act and defining it, and then keeping this language in all of the policies, but then also referencing back so that anybody even looking at the policy manual would see Crown Act and every place it applied, but that might be more redundant. I don't want to jump in, especially if there's been a lot of conversations about where to put this already. I hear what you're saying about wanting to have specific language. I was just wondering what options were considered.
And Kendra Hill just made a great suggestion, whispered to me as I wanted to share, which is one option, the board could adopt a resolution in support of the Crown Act. It is a bill, it's pending in the General Assembly. If the board supports it, that gives you an opportunity to get on record, talk about it, could be tied into the policy discussion even. And once you adopt a resolution, we can reference the resolution. And that kind of gives us a reason to use the phrase Crown Act. It's going to increase the visibility of the policy. If people are Googling it, it turns up, but instead of referencing an act, because that's my only hesitation, is referencing Crown Act. Act means something that's been passed into law. So we wouldn't want to say Crown Bill, because that would be confusing, but we could reference the board's resolution in support of the Crown Act, a Crown Act. So that might give us the ability to reference it, and all credit to Ms. Hill.
Some legal red tape right there, but I appreciate the great.
Wait, you said water during this. Thank you. Thank you for the recommendation.
Ms. Caulfield?
I agree with adding the link, just so people can be informed and be linked to it and understand. I always like the links that go along with the policies, because it just kind of gives people further explanation if they need it. But the language that's in H, I feel like if we remove all of that, it doesn't necessarily, it could conflict with some of the things that you have to sign when you are in things like shop class and, things where it could be a safety issue. And it could be just as simple as tying it up when you're doing a project or something like that, so that you're not a safety risk. I think it puts the schools in liability if you're now having teacher and student confused and arguing in class about it. So if they were to able to leave it, I feel that it just adds more of a safety clarification rather than taking it out. Because E, I understand what it's saying. For me, E is more about suitable, and I think that rather than safety, and I think suitable could be a matter of interpretation what that means. So I don't want to have teachers being conflicted on what the safety is. I mean, I know when you take like shop classes and stuff, sometimes you have to sign papers that say that this is what you're doing in class, these are your risks, and you understand that as a parent. I feel like we can have both.
That's a great idea. Suitable is subjective.
Right.
So, Mr. Swanson and I were just caucusing over here, and I guess I'm wondering if, or speaking directly to you, Ms. Caulfield, if you would be okay with the friendly amendment not being keep all of that piece, but actually just remove the word suitable and put it back to health and safety in E, so that it's a shorter, more concise, and doesn't get back to people's reading policy, and so that it doesn't get lost in a big jumble, but it's one clear, easy pull out for people to see. Because I think I totally hear you on the word suitable.
Right, but I feel like on E, is there two E's?
No, just one.
I didn't know if it was a sub.
But we'd have to have another different word in there, because otherwise the sentence,
Oh, that was my recommendation, that we actually just use the language that is below, which is comply with specific health or safety regulations.
so it's taking that specific language
Yeah.
and just moving it over to E.
Instead of
Just
suitable.
moving it there,
Yeah.
I agree. You're just basically swapping it and putting it in different areas, so it protects.
Right, just that phrase right there, to your point, comply
Yeah.
with specific health and safety regulations instead of the word suitable.
And remove the subjectivity.
And maybe that's where we could add the Crown Act link in H, because it specifically talks about
We
it.
could do that.
And I think probably empower the schools administration to have those rules, because I think without that language that we struck off, it makes it harder for the schools to say this is something that we're doing for safety.
Yeah, I agree.
That's a good point. In current E, though, it says clothing. doesn't reference hairstyles. Would the idea be to change that to say clothing?
Did this
So
not make it all the way down?
This one does have hairstyle.
Oh, and I'm sorry, I was looking at the, I see.
There you go.
Got it. So then we would replace clothing and hairstyles. I'm just trying to figure out how the language from H would plug in. It
I
would
mean,
be,
I think,
schools may impose restrictions on clothing and hairstyles only when, and then we'll carry over the rest of that language.
the thought of moving it there was, by having that language talking about health and safety in H, it almost looked like it was negating the work of uplifting those hairstyles.
Yep.
And so by moving it to E, you're still keeping the health and safety piece, and that was my own, where I just kept the language that was there, but you're right, it should be health and safety.
So one talks
yeah.
about the
And having that in E, yeah. Mr. Swanson?
So just so I can make sure I'm on the same page as you all, the pieces that are struck out in H, we're saying put that over with and combining E and F?
Yeah, I think, is it combining E and F?
Just E?
Just the
Okay. Because,
you're thinking
and
it should
then,
be combined because it's uniforms.
for E and F, possibly marrying those two with the safe den, with the language that you left at Ms. Caulfield. But I could have been on a different, I was trying to follow.
I wasn't putting it all together, but I think it kind of does go together.
What you see in E.
Right, that's, I thought E and F really should go together because they complement one another.
I agree.
And then just leaving H as alongside the closest thing that we can get to a Crown Act is with language in H until we.
Sometimes it goes.
Right.
We also have the last paragraph in applicability, which is the last paragraph on the second page. This policy does not apply to school-sanctioned uniforms and costumes approved for athletics, choral band, dance, or dramatic performances, except as specifically noted in this policy based on exception or accommodation. This policy applies at all times when students are present on school property or in attendance at all official school-sponsored events. So, yes, sir.
I just want to get confirmation. There was a recommendation to combine E and F. Is that what you
I
guys would
think
like staff to do?
we're looking, I think there was some consensus. I don't know if we posed it to the whole board. Dr. Ng, did I see your hand up on
No.
some? Okay. So combining E and F and adding language having to deal with health and safety that mimics the struck language from H.
So I can give a stab at a way to merge those if you want to see if we can get that fly here. To merge E and F, I would think you would just start with F. Maybe specialized courses may require specialized attire such as sports uniforms or safety gear. That concept is still sound. And then, but then can carry over since it's related with, let's see, schools may impose restrictions on student clothing and hairstyles only when strictly necessary to comply with specific health or safety regulations in light of unique hazards in a particular context, e.g. physical education classes, science labs, wood shops, or similar activities. And that would be a new E to replace E and F.
Okay. So do F, E, and then the strikeout portion of H.
So G becomes F and H becomes G. Do you feel comfortable with that, board members? Is there a thumbs up on that combination of E and F? And having something similar, maybe not the exact verbiage. I know Dr. Crane and Mr. Ramey will work on this before it comes to the board, but making sure that it's getting rid of suitable and making sure it's specific to health and safety.
That suitable's gone. And then the only question remaining is how do we work in a Crown Act reference?
I think, again, to Ms. Caulfield's point, I think it's, while I agree that the act does not pass, that is the name of the
Yeah,
actual
no,
official
I understand.
website.
Yeah.
So I guess my point is less about it being a federal act, but more about it being a reference link to,
Right.
because you can't take it away, that's actually the name of the actual website.
Right. No, I understand that.
So So that's my recommendation, is that it be a link so people have a backstory. Doctor, looks like you have some feedback.
I thought that, like, in recognition of the growing movement as outlined in the Crown Act website.
Bravo, Doctor.
Good job. Thank you, Doctor.
Or if
It's
you'd
not
like
it's on the
to,
Crown Act,
Right.
but it's the Crown Act website.
Yeah.
I was trying to think of a way to get the words Crown Act in the policy, not just a hyperlink, but like that way if you search, if you're searching, it'll be the number one result that'll come up at the search. And that could be, something like, especially if the board likes Ms. Hill's idea of a resolution in support of the Crown Act, the Wake County Board of Education has
I'm going to
adopted a
leave that to
resolution.
leadership. That's above my pay grade as policy chair, but.
Yeah, I mean, but if,
Maybe.
if that would give you, I think, a perfect entry to the Wake County Board of Education has adopted a resolution in support of the Crown Act. It could be like a note at the end of the policy, note, for more information about Crown Act issues, click here or something like that, direct people to outside resources if you want to do that as well.
Thank you. Well, I mean, yes, I'm a yes.
Would you be
Thank you, Dr.
okay with that as a note at the bottom of the policy as opposed to, or do you think it should go in the section here on here?
I think it should be in H, because when you do search, I mean, the nice thing about our policy manual is when you do search, it does the thing where it highlights that
Where it
specific
is.
piece. So I think I like Dr. Ng's language referencing, so that it is in that specific section. Thank you.
It took both of us to come up with the word.
Would that then fit at the very beginning of H? As in sort of an introduction to the
I think
concept?
that's a lovely introduction.
I think so, too.
Because it's in the spirit of that,
Yeah.
and in recognition, or I forget the exact word that Dr. Ng used, but it sounded lovely.
Yeah, in recognition of the growing nationwide movement as outlined in the Crown Act website.
as you said.
And I'm not familiar, what's the Crown Act website? Is that like a
It is.
nonprofit or
Literally
something?
Google it, it's the first thing that
I
comes
know, I
up.
was like, hold on. I should have Googled it before I made that recommendation.
Unless they made a movie, and then you can't find it.
It's just,
No, it's literally
It's
the
you're
official
endorsing
Crown
a-
Act.
you'd be endorsing
thecrownact.com.
an external webpage.
Yeah.
It's literally www.thecrownact.com.
Is that a problem to reference an outside
Well,
link?
not if you endorse it, and, know what the positions are and endorse it. I guess you don't control if they change the website. I suppose there's some
I mean,
risk of
sadly, it
that.
hasn't changed in a long time because they've been working on this for over 8
I mean, I
years.
think it's up to you. I can't think of other policies that specifically direct to external websites, but you could do it.
I know we have one. I know we have another one that goes somewhere, I'm sure of it.
I'm sure we do too. I mean, again, I feel comfortable with it. Definitely people can take a look at it for levels of comfort, but it hasn't really changed a lot. And a lot of, like I said, a lot of organizations like the YWCA who support women, because that's actually who came up first. That's not in Google, it's the YWCA. But that's
Should we
because they've done a
reference
lot
the
of outreach.
actual bill as well?
Oh, that's a good, we could. It's a North
Right.
Carolina bill.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, even though it hasn't passed, I think it's, because you're talking about the growing recognition, so at the time that we're making.
That's a
this
great
policy-
idea. We could actually put,
Even if the legislation doesn't pass,
Yeah.
it's officially introduced, it
It's
becomes
still-
part of the record.
it's still the record.
And it is a legal
that's what
document
we're
that can be
referring
cited
to.
to.
That's a good point. That would be a kind of a permanent link to a government website that's just
That we know-
got whatever the
that we know
statute
generally
will-
doesn't go away.
It probably won't. I'm guessing the Watching It For is probably not going to happen, but that link will always be there, and it'll be an objective government site. that you-
I mean, that takes us away from the liability of anything that's posted on the website.
That ever gets hacked or...
Right.
If they lose their
When the
email.
organization
the
changes their
liability
identity.
But yes, I think that's a great idea. They too are a liability. That's actually a good idea. I like that.
Any other questions, comments, concerns with the student dress code aspect? Yeah.
I don't know if anybody wants to add this, but I've actually had several parents, while I've been on the board, bring this up about students wearing slippers to school.
Oh, we have a whole thing on shoes. That was
Did
something that we
everybody
had
pass that one?
B.
4B, or no, 5B, right?
Students must wear shoes at all times except when changing for physical education or athletic practices or events when specifically directed otherwise by a teacher or administrator, and that's courtesy of Mr. Bell. We didn't expect that one to come in so explicitly, but slippers, huh?
I mean, I remember,
Slip-on,
I know elementary
like
school, they
people
say
wearing this.
absolutely not, but you're
Yeah.
right.
I
Because
mean,
they
you
play
could go up
outside.
to any high school, you'll see them in their pajamas, their hoodie, and their slip-on slippers.
You could probably walk around South Store and see that. But yes.
And, you know, not, I mean, they were talking about the safety of it, you know, but also just like the kind of
I
dress
call
for
it
success kind of attitude. I don't know about you, but when
I mean,
I
if
put my
we-
slippers on at home, I'm nice and comfy.
Dr. Matillo, do you know if Mr. Bell has anything about slippers versus shoes with an appropriate sole?
Do we need to define shoes or no?
I would say those slippers do not give them an attitude. My daughter wears those slippers for athletics. They come out, her shoes come out, track athletes wear them. So I would go with not comfort. It's not really attached to an attitude. There's not any athlete who doesn't go to slippers.
That's right.
In my experience with the house full of athletes, not me.
I would agree with that.
So, but I see your point around, for safe, so I guess I'm opposing the attitude attached because I think that's derogatory, but I support the safety purposes of it.
Maybe just adding back, I don't know, like what would,
Well, when Gabby's at elementary, the principal there wouldn't even let them wear sandals because he just felt like it was, and I didn't disagree, it's a hazard to them on the playground. We could do like work, non-slip shoes.
So that's what I'm gonna say, you can always get into the weeds of flip-flop versus slipper versus slip-on.
That's why I said I think you got to come with, I would Miss Pappy, maybe talk to Mr. Bell and see what he
Yeah.
says from risk management, let him give us some, AJ's like, great work.
That'll be a whole R&P on shoes that I'm not ready for.
We defer to you all to come back. Unless you all have come up with something really quick.
Per the migration.
One of the reasons for leaving the high school principalship was not to have. We are having it at
At least I always send you an apology. I'm so sorry, Dr. Matillo. It is me again.
All right.
So I do have a thought on this addition, one last sentence to reference Crown Act.
Yes.
I have something to run by you. This would be the new first sentence in section H, if you like it, you can tweak it. And this would not require you to adopt a resolution, but you could also do that.
Current section H, new section G.
Yeah, correct,
Okay.
new section G. And the first sentence would read, the Wake County Board of Education supports state and federal Crown Act legislation that would provide protections for protective natural cultural hairstyles. And then the rest flows from there. So it sets the stage by saying you support the pending bills, and we have hyperlinks to the actual bills, and we have the word Crown Act in the policy.
could you read that again?
That would require you to take a position on the legislation. The suggestion is the Wake County Board of Education supports state and federal Crown Act legislation that would provide protections for protective, natural, or cultural hairstyles. And then the rest would flow as in the current draft.
So add the rest that we see on H that is not crossed out?
Well, after that sentence would follow what is in this version that is just circulated in paper. Students are free to adopt hairstyles of their choice. That whole sentence that references the hair protections.
I'm good with that. Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
All right.
Does that work?
Do we have or I guess we're doing it as late, so we'll hold this and move on to 1710, or?
You can do it separately.
Okay. All right, do we have a motion to send this 4316 student dress code to first reading?
So moved. Second.
All right, we have a motion from Ms. Edmonds, a second from Ms. Caulfield. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, we're going to move over to Policy Code 1710, 4021, 7230, prohibition against discrimination, harassment, and bullying. Dr. Robinson and Dr. Crane.
So in conjunction with the two policies that we've talked about, we felt it necessary to add a expanded definition of discrimination that includes hair discrimination specifically. So we've added language in 1710, Section A, number 1, which defines discrimination, to include the following. Discrimination includes, but is not limited to, any unlawful differentiation in the treatment of others that is claimed to be based on lawful and non-discriminatory factors, but is in fact motivated by the desire to differentiate based on race, ethnicity, sex, gender identity, sexual orientation, pregnancy, religion, age, or disability. For example, singling out persons with hairstyles that are historically associated with a particular racial or ethnic group, such as afros, bantu knots, dreadlocks, braids, or twists, for unfavorable treatment is a form of unlawful discrimination if the expressed concerns about hairstyles are a proxy for racial or ethnic discrimination. And then see Policy 4316 and Policy 7340.
And the idea here, very just briefly, is to underscore, while you have protections in your employee and student dress code policy, there's a right to have wear the hair what you want. This is also a stronger statement that if you purport to be saying you can't have your hair that way, but it's really about race, that's discrimination under board policy. You can lose your job if you're an employee and discriminate against other employees or students. So it does require intent, but that's the legal standard for proof of discrimination. The other policies don't require intent. They're just hair protections. This would say, don't say you're discriminating, you're differentiating based on hair if it's really about race.
We did talk about the rest of this policy at a prior policy committee meeting, and I think pretty quickly determined that we need to look at our student code of conduct when it comes to harassment and bullying in this particular policy. So that will be coming up, I believe, in August, that we talk about that. So I just wanted to keep that at top of mind as we look at this. Are there any comments, Dr. Eng?
Just to play a devil's advocate, what if a person wears a hairstyle that is not consistent with their race, ethnicity, so forth?
I love that you brought this back to us, Dr. You're right. You're right, though. No, it's a fair question.
So, I mean, does somebody have the right to do that? And is somebody getting into trouble for being made fun of for doing that?
I mean, I'm not a principal, but I have some opinions about it.
I mean, I think of, like, maybe this is no longer a thing, but when I was growing up, if you had that one family that was lucky to go to the Caribbean, they came back with the
Everyone had those braids
and the
telling my age.
very sunburned skin in between.
Telling my age, about coming out of the water.
I mean, my read on this is that kid's not going to get in trouble for having that hairstyle.
Yeah.
Even though it's not, if it's
Cultural
a
to them.
little, white girl that comes back, like, wearing that.
I mean, I've certainly seen it my whole life. It's definitely cultural appropriation, but not against the policy, but problematic.
Yeah.
And I guess that's why I said I have an opinion that it's cultural appropriation, but I mean, I'm 49. I've watched white women wear bow hair braids my entire life, especially when they come back from vacation. Now, I don't recall anyone teasing them. I would also say, like it or not, a lot based on culture. I mean, there are a lot more white men locking their hair now. I think kids unfortunately tease about a lot of things. I don't know that I would single this out and isolate it because of that. But yes, I do think it's possible. But I also don't think it's something that's new to our culture and to our schools.
But could somebody use this policy, in accusing a student of, or that is making fun of another student for that particular scenario?
So I think kids tease kids regardless, right? Like, and you can have a kid with different hairstyles, and maybe I just get some bad bangs, and I look terrible with bangs. So, if somebody were to tease me for having that, I think then what is bullying? It's not getting teased for a hairstyle.
So that's that's why I think my opinion of why we've talked about keep coming back to how do we address bullying, right? Because do I think that a principal is likely going to say this is bullying? Probably not. do I think we need to address our student code of conduct and how we currently address bullying overall? 100%. So while I don't think this policy will change the current dynamics that we're struggling with, I do think, back to Ms. Mahaffey's original point, I do think we have to have this conversation, and I trust that you'll bring it back then. I do think we have to have a larger conversation about some consistency on how we address teasing, which essentially for some kids really is bullying, and in most cases it is, and we have not acculturated ourselves to get rid of the word teasing when we know it still can be harmful.
It sometimes turns into bullying.
Well, I think yes, but I'm also saying that we still use the word teasing, which makes it not harmful, and I think we have to start changing our own language because we don't get to decide which kids are harmed by it or not, right? And I think it's a different day, and I think we have to have different conversations.
Dr. Taylor?
So, Dr. Ng, I'll try to add clarity. If I'm wrong, you just tell me to be quiet. But I think what you're saying is if a student decides to wear dreadlocks to make fun of me, as opposed to me wearing dreadlocks and somebody making fun of you. Is that what you're saying?
Not exactly.
Okay,
I mean,
okay.
I'm saying for like somebody
That's
who
a
is.
commitment to go for a bit.
I know,
That's real commitment.
yeah.
Because I was trying to make sure I understood what you said.
No,
Okay.
the scenario I'm thinking about is what if some person who is not African American come dressed with the, you know, the hairstyle, right? And then somebody makes fun of that student for doing that.
So that could be an instance of discrimination, because actually federal law actually prohibits treating people differently because of their affiliation or association with other groups based on race. So if it were making fun of someone because you look black, because that makes you look black and therefore I'm making fun of you, that could be actually a form of racial discrimination.
Okay, now,
I feel like we're getting into the weeds of bullying is bullying at some point. Yeah.
well, but that's, I mean, there's a lot going around here, and then we heard two kind of distinct things here. I think supposedly in agreement, but I don't think they actually agree, right? Like, bullying and discrimination are the same things, but here in policy, we define them separately.
They are separate.
And they are separate,
Yeah, they're
right?
separate.
And so we talk specifically about this language under discrimination, but it's not talked about under bullying and harassment. So, you know, I just want to, the version that I have online, I don't know if it's been updated, but what I have in Assembly here includes the language under discrimination only. And so I don't know that you could just say that activity, those actions would be discrimination and therefore bullying and harassment.
You're correct. I missed it. It could be considered bullying or harassment under your policy to treat someone differently because it's in the paragraph that begins harassment and bullying include but are not limited to, and it's treating behavior that is reasonably perceived as being motivated by a differentiating characteristic or motivated by an individual's association with a person who is perceived to have a differentiating characteristic. That's what I was thinking.
So it's covered by the existing language.
Covered by existing language under bullying and harassment, correct?
Okay.
Right. If it's racially motivated.
Okay. So what we're proposing would not change.
I think no, it's not, this wouldn't actually, I don't view this as a substantive change to your policy. It's really just making explicit that the proxy concept, that discrimination, discrimination by proxy is still discrimination if the intent is discriminatory. So if you purport to be making a distinction based on some neutral objective factor, but it turns out it's only women who fall under this category. It's always applied to women, and you're really applying a proxy for people who wear dresses are treated differently. I'm just making something up. Only women wear dresses, or typically only women wear dresses. Not only, for the most part, that would be a proxy.
I got you. Okay, thank you.
Good discussion.
Great questions.
All right. Any other questions on this policy? All right, can we get a...
Motion to move to first reading.
All right, we have a motion by Mr. Hershey to move this to first reading. Is there a second?
Just wanted to help out.
Second.
All right, second by Mr. Swanson. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? All right, does that get all three of them?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Dr. Crane. All right, we are now going to move into 3410 Testing and Assessment Program. And thank you, everybody, for your work on the Crown Act language. And so now we're going to see Mr. Cook and Ms. Honeycutt. Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon. So we are asking for revision to policy 3410 to align practice with policy. We had a proof of learning and assessment guide that the CTE department at the Department of Public Instruction published for us. And it gives us guidance about how we count or calculate final grades for our English language learner students. And in that guide, it says that we should not include their final exam grades in their final grade calculation for the first 2 years that they are in the country. And that is a conflict with our existing policy 3410 that says we only exempt that 20% calculation for the first year that they are in the country.
So we're just changing where it says that one line, that's it? All right, are there any questions?
Motion to move to first reading.
Second.
All right, we have a motion from Mr. Hershey, a second from Mr. Haggerty. Last call. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay? All right, thank you so much.
Can we backdate this one?
I feel like it should be retroactive.
So how long we did?
Get a Wayback Machine?
All right, next up, I have a new policy, and that is Policy 1810, Sustainability. This is something that has been asked for quite some time. I noticed Ms. Wood in the room.
Oh, yes.
Thank you for your persistence. And this is our first go, so this is a brand-new policy. As we saw with the Crown Act language, sometimes takes a little bit, a little workshopping. So
Could ours go this fast as the previous one?
I will say
It will be about as long as the Crown Act.
could, but my guess is this is going to take
Some workshopping.
multiple iterations, and that is not to denigrate any of the work that has already been done. And I just want to say thank you for putting this together and lifting this up, because creating a policy from scratch is no easy feat.
And of course, you know who's done the majority of the legwork.
I know, Dr. Crane is incredible.
I will say that she has been kind enough to meet with Dave and myself and others many times to talk through putting this new sustainability policy together. We were offered different policies from many places. I know one of them was Portland, Maine, that we looked at first, but you had a different Portland in mind.
No, it was the same one.
Oh, it was, okay. So Julie crafted this draft policy for us to look at, and we went through and made comments, and that's why we're here today. There are 7 goals and strategies contained in the proposed draft policy. I would like to point out, we do a lot of sustainable things now. I went back to look, and as far back as February 23, we presented some site sustainability goals to you all, and I know we've done some updates in the last 12 months on similar topics. And so we went through this, we looked at it, we talked through some minor adjustments and changes, and brought you all what we felt like would be a good start to drafting this policy out.
Just to
go ahead.
fill you in on the background, we took a look at a couple of North Carolina LEA policies. So we looked at one by Chapel Hill Carrboro, Guilford County, Rowan Salisbury. We also took a look at UNC and NC State, the UNC system sustainability policy, as well as NC State. And then we kind of branched out and took a look at Broward County in Florida, Public Schools of Brookline, Massachusetts, Montgomery County, Maryland, often used as a comparative district for Wake, Baltimore County, Portland, Maine, which I mistakenly thought was Portland, Oregon for some time.
Well, I mean, again, it was a coin toss when it came to Portland, Oregon. It was going to be either Portland after Portland, Maine, or another city that clearly we're not going to remember because it didn't come out. But
We also a couple of districts in New Jersey, Clearview, Quinnipiac, and Princeton. And the New Jersey School Boards Association had a model policy out there. Basically, what I wanted to do was to pull the background, just the skeleton of a policy, and then fill in with elements that I thought really did apply to us and the boards of this goal, as well as some of our local municipalities. So Wake County Board of Commission has a growth and sustainability goal in their plan, with some specific language about achieving clean energy by 2050 and partnering with Wake County Public Schools, Wake County Community College, etc. So in the last bit of the policy, we acknowledged that in the last goal we to collaborate with local governmental agencies on sustainability goals, and we list Wake County government specifically and adopting those goals too. So what are your thoughts? I can go through it section by section, or
I think we've all kind of had time to go through it and read it. So rather than do the section by section, I think just since this is our first stab at it, let's get our first impressions and, what we liked, what we expected, what we think we'd like to see going forward.
And in full disclosure, as a good teacher and researcher should do, I will acknowledge, while not anywhere on paper, that I did use ChatGPT to do some of the crunching of
Trust me, I try. I keep
17 districts, or 20 districts worth of policy goals to get some summation and specificity and guideline. I did not use any output of ChatGPT as far as our policy is concerned, but it was a great way to use a tool to crunch a lot of the same language and have it summed down or condensed down into similar parts. So
Way to model academic transparency, Dr. Crane.
Not only that, what a great way to help your former colleagues who are English teachers teach students how to adequately and accurately, appropriately use it, because it is useful in that way. So I think you also just did some PD there too.
I just wanted to be transparent.
Dr. Robson let OP know that she just did some PD.
Mr. Haggerty?
Thank you. So let me say a couple thank yous, because as you all have been here a while know, this is something that I've been working for several years of my board service. And I appreciate our policy chair and our facilities chair both really uplifting this and making this a priority, and staff for coming up with a very good model template for us. So I really appreciate all the effort that's gone into this, and it's great to see it finally reach the light of day. I like a lot of this policy. I like its structure. The one thing that I have some questions about would be toward the end on section 7, where it's talking about the sustainability goals. And while I think collaboration with local government agencies on sustainability goals is important, I'm wondering in terms of our policy if it's just better practice for us to set our own goals based on audits of our own facilities, our own energy usage, and our own, kind of definitions of some of these terms. And I think we can still have a collaborative approach But, while I know Wake County government has committed and it lists like 5 specific areas, I don't really know, because Wake County government adopted them, I don't necessarily know what they mean, how ambitious or realistic they are, or if we would want to go further in some areas, like where we say reducing greenhouse gas emissions by how much and what context, right? Reduction of fossil fuel use, right? Or we might see something that we do that, as a large enterprise in the district, might be very important to our own sustainability goals adopted earlier in the policy that maybe Wake County isn't looking at. Like Wake County seems to be focusing a lot on energy usage, but we might have waste reduction or water reduction, recycling, paper consumption, or other things that are easily attainable that our schools might come back to us and say, maybe these should be some priorities. So I love the structure, I love everything. The one question I have is just adopting those Wake County goals into our own operations as a formal policy versus maybe having some more flexibility for us to design our own goals.
Other thoughts, Dr. Ng?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think to make a policy be more universal for our use, I think we need to remove that piece of it, and if we want to establish our own goals, we can do so. And the other thought, I like the language. I think there's a balance between what we want to do and what is affordable to do. And so I'm not quite sure, there's a lot of words here that talk about cost as well. I just don't know where we can make it a point to say that there needs to be a balance between, cost effectiveness versus, our goals for energy, efficiency.
Yep.
If I may respond to that, that's okay. We struggle with that all the time. There are things that we would like to do and endeavors we would like to begin, but there are costs associated with that, with some of the newer technologies. And also, and I promised staff I would share this information, we have to be careful. We are struggling to maintain what we have now and those technologies, the current ones that we have. And so as we introduce new things, that's a whole different skill set, a whole different level of being able to maintain things. So again, in talking with staff about this, there's not a hesitancy. There's some awareness of doing and trying new things. I'll give you a prime example. We use a lot of cast iron boilers. That's old technology. We know how to work on them. We know how to repair them. We can get parts from them. They work. The newer boilers, while they are more energy efficient, we don't have that same comfort level or talent level to work on them and maintain them. So I wanted to share that from a staff perspective.
I know the text of it has the meaning of what we want, which is there is going to have to be a balance. We can't just all be going for energy efficiency, but not worry about the cost, right?
Along those same lines, again, Ms. Mahaffey, if I may, we put a lot of time into this, and this is important, so I want to get my 15 minutes while I can.
We'll be more than 15 minutes.
Okay.
We already said we're coming back to
Okay.
it. Don't worry.
Again, there are things that we would like to do that we're not comfortable proceeding with them. Earlier today, you all heard a conversation about the energy partnership. Some of the things we find in reality is we design things to be energy efficient on the front end. Where we run into problems is after that warranty's over and we have to go out and service these things that we have installed, which are great for the environment and they're energy efficient, we many times may not have the talent level to keep them up or maintain them in the fashion that they should be. And so, again, we want to keep this in mind. We're pushing forward on sustainable items. You all are going to see the evidence of that as we move forward when we're bringing you bids. We're looking at things. Some of the things that we want to do to step out of our comfort zone aren't specifically contemplated in the budgets that we currently have, but we're still looking at them anyway and hope to get alternate bids for them.
Mr. Hershey?
So, while I love everything that's kind of spelled out in this first attempt, I was actually thinking about the sustainability policy in a much different way. And I kind of reference NC State or Wake Tech's sustainability policies, which
I'll send those to everybody.
yeah, and I'll just quickly read. Like Wake Tech understands that a healthy, sustainable society requires citizens to understand the balance among economic success, social equity, and environmental conservation. So the college is committed to promoting a culture of sustainability across its campuses and throughout the community. And so the way I would view this as having a broader sustainability policy that is not so heavily focused on with a bunch of goals around facilities, but touches our budget, the sustainability. Right. Thank you. And then we develop a separate, so we have our sustainability policy, and then we have a sustainability plan. And you develop the plan with the community, and you make it and we don't create goals that we may not get to, like, so we have some real concrete goals, but, so it's not, again, so it's not all geared at facilities, it's, because we as a board routinely ask, when we hear a great project, tell me how that scales up. How does it become sustainable through our school system? And I think, I don't want to say that, there's elements in this first draft that have that, but I think going down the goals and the list that get so much to the environment part, take away, and I say this as a huge environmentalist, like, give me all of that. But then, how do the other departments fit into this sustainability policy? And that makes sense.
And if you look at the policy, if you look at number one, that goal and strategy, it references a general statute. And in that general statute, it talks about an awareness program being made available to schools concerning recycling. And so I certainly, Mr. Hershey, appreciate that more comprehensive look about how we do this as a district as a whole, because it's not just about one component of what we do, it's about everything that we do.
Well, so the policy chair and I went to the NC State sustainability, met with NC State about their sustainability policy, and it's very short. They said that it was a process to get full buy-in, but they have a committee, I think they have a cross-departmental committee.
It's their facilities group, there's an academic piece, and then they bring in students as well.
And just, that's kind of the way, so as another example, and with them being a partner of ours, the role they play in not just our county, but the state, to me, another good model of a broader policy that is going to hit every aspect of them. And they said it's going to take some time for them, and I get that.
I think for me, there were big takeaways from this policy in advancing and lifting up what we already do and where we would like to be moving forward when it comes from the operational and facilities standpoint in this. And I think that is something that I 100% agree with. I would like to see our policy be more of a governance policy and maybe have a sustainability plan, because I don't want the board to necessarily, I want us to dictate that we should be sustainable, but I think that that is going to grow and change over time. And I don't want to, as we just had with Ms. Honeycutt, every time having to do a bunch of technical corrections every year because lead certification restriction requirements, for example, have changed. What I took away from the values workshop that many of us at this table and in this room went to, as well as speaking with NC State, was that sustainability can come in different forms, and I think we automatically go to the environmental, but there's a fiscal piece, having a bunch of old chairs sitting around in a warehouse, which we do. But, if all of a sudden there's an academic piece to it, and it's not just the teaching kids about recycling and food waste, but there's the idea that a lot of times in education, we put new strategies and plans on teachers, and we don't take anything away. And I always forget what, and I just was talking with Dr. Crane about this, what RTI and Dr. Robinson called it, because I automatically go to Gwyneth Paltrow and strategic uncoupling. Strategic abandonment. Strategic abandonment. But what do we do to make sure that we're not having our teachers getting whiplash from new academic ideas or trends? What are we doing to make sure that our departments are, so that we maintain our fiscal responsibility? So for me, I look at sustainability as having those three legs. And it was from that values workshop and speaking with the folks at NC State, so that it's more of a guidance of practice, and then seeing a sustainability plan come out, because none of us here are experts. I mean, at this half of the table, I don't know, maybe a couple are, but I'm certainly not. But how do we encompass those values so that it's a guiding policy rather than a policy with that's how I viewed it, but I may be the only one that saw it that way. Mr. Hager.
I want to give someone else an opportunity.
Yeah, anybody? All right, Ms. Caulfield?
Back to it.
Actually, that was going to be my comment, so I don't think you're the only one at the table. For me, and it's a great policy, it's an awesome start, but I think, we've talked about food waste before. I know there are certain things we have to put on the plate, but that's something we could hopefully work with our legislative what?
No pun intended.
Didn't even realize it did that. But we also have tech waste, that we have to be concerned about it. And, we've talked about trailers before and equipment and stuff. So for me, it's more the whole picture, how we can be efficient, how we can save the money, but also what we can do with those items that may not cost us money if we had the proper, I think communication is huge no matter what table you're sitting at. And I think there's just, with 200 schools, there's so much out there. And just having some kind of, I don't even know how you would do it, like a database of pulling, and you may even have something like this that we're just not even aware of, where you can pull things out to recycle from. Like, go to the recycle bin first for whatever it is that you need before you go to the project or whatever it is that you need to put in. I'm not sure if I'm explaining that correctly, but it's kind of like putting all of it in the bucket to make it sustainable, not just, because for me, the policy reads mostly about facility.
Yeah, and I was thinking along the lines of your train of thought. I was thinking of our strategic plan where Core Belief 7 talks about sustainability, and then I had to bring it up so I wouldn't forget, but AIM 16 talks about establishing metrics of accountability for departmental management. AIM 20 says establish new systemic processes and guidelines balancing operational efficiency, fiscal responsibility, and environmental sustainability. So those pieces are there. It's just a matter of how do we, since the strat plan is still relatively new and getting up and running. I see Dr. Robinson, He's smelling where I'm stepping here. But,
He just appreciates the consistency of always referring back to the strategy.
Right.
So you mentioned 3 legs earlier. Are the 3 legs in AIM 20 the 3 legs you're?
Well, the AIM 20 is operational efficiency, fiscal responsibility, and environmental sustainability. I would almost put operational and environmental together as to what I'm thinking and have like an academic piece to it because that is our core business.
Operational, environmental, academic,
And then fiscal. I mean, maybe there's 4 legs. I mean, chairs, as long
have
as
4
there's,
legs.
yeah. Right.
Not actually 3.
Right. So, I mean, those were the, I have, Ms. Caulfield, did you have more?
No, I think what you're saying, along the line of what you're saying, it just kind of ties some pieces together, like the academic parts that you talked about, it affects our fiscal part, so it really does help save in 2 different areas at once, so, yeah.
Next up, I have Ms. Johnson-Hostler, I have Chair Haggerty, and then I have Dr. Ng.
I mean, actually, Ms. Caulfield, I think, said almost everything, including my example, which was going to be technology. The last thing I'll say, because Ms. Wood is sitting across from me, is that when we were last at Lincoln Heights, I thought the students did a good job of giving tips. And I'm also looking at Wake Tech actually has a plan on how they move the university forward. So in addition to their policy, they actually have a plan. It's also very short. The goal is that people meet on a regular basis, similar to what you just noted for NC State. But I think to switch ourselves culturally, it's going to take those tips. Like I literally now go in my pantry and pull everything to the front before I go to the grocery store, right? Like that's, like we are not, all of us want to be and say that we're environmentally friendly, but those are not tips that just were readily available to me until I literally heard third graders? Third and fourth graders tell me some of those very clear, simple tips that actually really help to shift where I want to be personally in terms of how I see our culture itself. I think those are things that we could easily build into how we actually facilitate those aims in the strategic plan, like we do every other aim in there. We have Dr. Robinson has a team for how we're going to play all those things out. I think facilities is one of those pieces. Right. Clearly, I'd recommend third graders be a part of the students because I learned lots of tips that day. Thank you, Ms. Wood. But that's the only thing I'll add to what Ms. Caulfield said, because the first thing that came to my mind is I had an aha moment when the gentleman came to us right after COVID and said, you all are pretty much not doing a good job. You can actually recycle all of this technology and make money. And I was like, well, that sounds smart, right? But again, we are a business, and so we put everything in inventory, and we may never, ever use it, right? Which is not good for our environment. We know that for lots of reasons, and also not fiscally responsible to pay for all these buildings. But nonetheless, I thought that's a useful example that I think we can easily create a very streamlined policy with the 4 legs, we'll call it now. And then we actually have a very simple way that we're going to get there, which is engage facilities, academics, purchasing, all of the fiscal pieces, which you all know that I think purchasing is in the basement. But they all come to the table, and I do think the student feedback, because we do have such richness in our schools, so they are really trying to move us culturally to sustainability. So I'd be remiss if I didn't say I also think we should have a student voice, even if that's used through your students, like that we engage student voice somehow in this as well.
All right. So Mr. Haggerty, Dr. Ng, and then I saw Dr. Taylor with his hand up. And Sam wants to go again.
So I'm going to disagree with what's been said. I'm sorry.
We know.
We know.
That's why we went before you.
I've been doing it a while. I do not favor the streamlined policy. I like a policy closer to what the staff came up with. And this is just based on work in this area where I see other local governments around the state and other places have a very simple vision statement sounding policy. They hire a consultant who has a bunch of public meetings. They develop a sustainability plan that goes into a binder, and it's never used again. It's not part of management decisions. It's not something that they use to hold staff accountable. And it's just more of an afterthought sometimes that make people feel good that they've done this. And I bring it up because it's just, it's something I've run into time and time again, and it's so frustrating that, like, citizen boards will come back and they'll question, we put all of this work into something, what's been done? And they often just get really kind of short shrift. So, like, I love the idea of going to the strategic plan and using those metrics, right? And having more accountability in a plan. You know, if you look at that NC State model policy, it has several kind of spin-offs, right? Like, if you start at the UNC sustainability policy, I think that's maybe closer to what we're talking about, because it gets into all of these areas we've mentioned, design and construction, but the non-facility things too, right? Purchasing specifically, you know, planning and operations. And then you sort of see what they put in the state policy, but then you follow their standard operating procedure, and that goes out and lays out some more specific goals and things, I think similar to what we're talking about here. You know, it's obviously a group decision. I will tell you, though, that my preference is that we do identify some specific areas of concern, some priorities that we can build goals and targets around. And then I like the idea of having a plan, but I think it's similar to like the equity audit or the equity plan, and using that as a model where we'll look and see how we implement sustainability in these different operations, measure what we do, set our own goals, you know, because I think there's just so many areas where we could be doing so much more that would save the district money, would be good for the environment, would be great education for our students in terms of responsible stewardship going forward. And I don't know how you get all of that with a shorter, streamlined policy. I'm just so worried it'll get left out or glossed over.
And that's my reasoning for referencing the strategic plan, which obviously has an end date, but can house a lot of things like the equity plan. And so
that's largely why I'm recommending we look at Wake Tech's plan, because it actually does have a plan with specific goals that I felt like could be very similar to how we already do H and every aim. Every aim has a goal. I'm like, I can't even use the words, we have too many words, past aims, pillars, but they all have goals as well. So so I don't disagree with you. I think I was trying to find the fine middle, mostly because our tendency, I felt like unless we already know each of these policies, that we will miss the whole four legs that we, right now, right? Like we went to the thing that we could easily gravitate towards, which was facilities, and I do think we were missing the mark across the district, which you also agree with. So, but I just want to put a pin in it that I don't disagree with you, I just had a different way to get there.
Okay.
I agree. Because if you'll get off for the size, that's what I agree.
Just pretend that I'm the oldest person at the table.
Thank you.
Because, you know, the term sustainability can mean so much. And I struggle a lot of times to understand sustainability in all its various shapes and forms.
Because we just had recycle reuse.
And so, I mean, you know, yes, sustainability in the sense of environment makes the most sense to me. And I'm not, you know, saying there's not other areas of sustainability. But speaking to this particular policy, you know, I feel like we have the cart in front of the horse, the four legs of that horse, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
I'm following.
we can still use this as an environmental sustainability policy, but yet look at what we can do in terms of other areas of sustainability as a vision statement of some sort, kind of like what is intended in that broad.
So a separate academic or fiscal policy, and let this be a standalone. Is that what you're?
That's what I'm thinking. I mean,
Yeah.
it makes sense to have, you know, we have a environmental sustainability policy, and if we need to have some other areas of, you know, that we set some benchmarks for ourselves for other areas of sustainability, we can certainly look into it.
So, Dr. Taylor?
So, and I think everybody has really kind of hit these points, but we understand how very difficult this is. It's about how do we establish a philosophy, what we want to do, but also how we deal with the specifics and recognizing that depending on the organization, it can be different. I think this is good information for administration so we can go back and be able to better craft what we want this policy to be, but more particularly what we want the actions to be after that. I think what everybody realizes with the different organizations is that we're not at what I call an Apollo 13 type issue where if we don't make certain decisions real soon, then we end the planet. But everybody recognizes that we have to begin to do these things now so that at some point we get there. And so we will take this information back, and I think that's where I want to say the argument is going to be, but what is that middle ground going to be? And we want to make sure that we reflect that not only in the policy, but all the other pieces that we put after that.
Ms. Edmonds or Mr. Swanson, did you have? No.
I just wanted to uplift what Ms. Johnson-Hustler said and how crucial it is that we have the voices of the students in this and of staff. Because if we make a plan just here.
School-based staff.
Yes.
Not central office.
Correct.
Central services.
people who
staff.
are
Central service staff.
We know that y'all are giving
Yeah.
It goes nowhere if we don't have buy-in from the
right.
staff and students at schools. So we got to have that.
And clearly from every level, because Ms. Johnson-Hostler is reorganizing her pantry before she goes to the grocery store.
I just did it this weekend.
Yeah. But
I didn't rebuy peanut.
I want to reiterate our thanks for the work that has been done in this start that prompted this conversation. I hope, and recognize that none of what was said was putting down any of the work that you all put into this, whether it was, our facilities group or Dr. Crane or AI. But a first start is our first start, and crafting something from scratch is not easy, and we'll see this again. So thank you all. With less than 20 minutes left, we have more personnel of the 7,000 series to come as part of the migration. This was budgeted for 40 minutes, but we'll see what we can get through. I think Ms. Honeycutt set the record today.
I don't think we're going to beat the record, but we'll do our best. Hello again, everyone.
Welcome back.
Thank you. We've already completed one policy, so moving along already. Our next policy that we want you to review is policy 7550, absences due to inclement weather. This is a policy that is set in the School Board Association policy manual, and we are migrating this policy and have incorporated information specific to our policy needs. We've pretty much followed the School Boards Association policy to talk about days that employees have to come to work when students aren't required to be there. We've laid out those areas in terms of the options that our employees may have. One of the things we added in number 5 here is that employees would be expected to use compensatory leave prior to using any other eligible leave. Number 6 talks about teleworking, and we've added in with the supervisor's approval. Number 7 probably is a part that has more extensive changes, which is that we've added in information to make it clear, consistent with our current policies, in terms of an employee who may be making up missed time, and that they should do that at a time agreed upon with the supervisor, and normally their scheduled work time. It also says that unless the superintendent authorizes or the designee authorizes that an employee who is a non-exempt employee, meaning a employee who is classified, some of our support staff employees, would make up missed time during a week where the work week, where the inclement weather happened. Or they would make up missed time within 45 days as long as they don't accrue overtime. So just for explanation, this section reflects the idea that if we have inclement weather, as you all probably know, we have a 40-hour work week. If an employee misses for an inclement weather day, if they're able to make up that day during that work week, then we don't get into an overtime situation. If they have to make it up in another week, then it may require overtime unless it's a week where the employee isn't working a full 40 hours, such as they have a holiday that week or they already taken leave that week or something like that. So we wanted to put in here the flexibility of the employee making it up during the week when there's inclement weather, or making it up in another week where they won't go into overtime. And that's just because, as you all know, if when our employees go into overtime more than 40 actual work hours, then we have to pay them time and a half. And so we're trying to be cognizant of that potential additional cost. For us, we don't pay time and a half most times. We earn comp time, or those employees earn comp time at time and a half, but we're still trying to balance those requirements with our employees need to be able to make up that time. So we also added in here that employees who are not covered by the Fair Labor Standards Act or who are exempt from that act would also make up any time within 45 calendar days or the end of their contract, whichever comes sooner. The school board's policy had 120 days. We changed that to 45 so that we could not have to carry a lot of things on the book for a long time in terms of an employee trying to make up that time. And that's something that our chief finance officer wanted us to encourage, to try to move those, not have those things sitting on the books for a long time. The next part of the policy talks about if the board needs to make modifications to the school calendar due to inclement weather. And I will say, just for the record, we understand that the way our calendars are built right now, we're not having to deal with a lot of these issues now with some of the bank days and things like that in the calendar, but we do have this information in here in case we have to have those inclement weather days for staff to make up. One thing I would like to modify as we're talking here is the last sentence that we have here that starts with "in situations." I just want to restructure that sentence, and this is me, I apologize after the fact looking at this, to say "in situations where the school system is closed due to inclement weather and a makeup day is not required, the superintendent will determine options for staff." So it's just moving the last phrase of the sentence to the beginning, to be the initial phrasing in the sentence. Other than that, that's all I have for this policy, but I am open to any questions that you all may have.
Motion to move to first reading.
Second.
We have a motion from Mr. Hershey, a second from Mr. Swanson. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right.
I have a question. It doesn't change the vote.
Yep.
For a lot of these employee-centric policies, do we ever run into confusion with parents or others looking up something, like on this one, absences due to inclement weather, even though the policy is clearly about employees, looking for the student policy, such that we need to reference people back to student policy, or is that just?
I don't know. So the policies are, as you know, organized by section in the manual. If someone searched for inclement weather, they probably would get both this policy, and I know there is a policy in section 5, in the 5,000 section that deals with closings due to emergencies that also addresses inclement weather. I'm not sure if there's something else specific to students, but we can add employee absences due to inclement weather in the title.
I mean, it might be redundant. I've just had people
No, it's okay.
sometimes bring these questions to me.
I like it. Thank you. We'll do that.
Makes sense, especially when you see the part where it says the board is in charge. And I'm like, we don't make that call.
Yes.
Next up, we have 7551. Do we have
Yes.
to make another motion?
Policies.
I think that's a technical correction,
I
right?
think unless you want to vote on it, we can consider that a technical, just the title,
Yeah.
Okay.
adding one word.
And because we may have similar absences for religious holidays for students, we will add employee absences for religious holidays too, if that helps for this policy. So this policy breaks out 3 different ways that an employee may take time for a religious holiday. Part A talks about just using your accrued leave, which could be done at any time that you want to use your accrued leave, and eligible leave to take a day for those employees who can use their annual leave. They may be able to use that. Some may use personal leave if they have that available. But essentially, if an employee wants to take accrued leave for a religious holiday, they just follow their regular leave processes, and they don't have to follow anything else in this policy. Part B is the part that talks about making up days for religious holidays. It is based upon a provision in the DPI manual and in the administrative code, which allows for 2 days that an employee may be absent with pay to observe a bona fide religious holiday. We have laid out some requirements here that the employee provides advance notice and that they create a make-up time and a plan with their supervisor to make up that time. We talk with the finance officer about adding in a form to track that time so that if there's an audit or any question with regard to time being used, that can be made available quickly to provide that information. But the employee provides that plan. They can use up to 2 days to be absent for a religious holiday, and they will be paid for those 2 days if they are absent for that time. If an employee does not have leave, or if they don't want to make up time, then they're also able to take non-paid leave for up to 2 days. And this is just a provision that we have added in for employees who may not have leave or who may not want to go through the make-up process.
Any questions on policy 7551? The addition of employee absences?
I'll get it through the legal references. Slow us down.
Okay. Is there a motion to approve this
So
policy?
moved.
All right, motion by Mr. Hershey, second by Mr. Swanson. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. Moving on to workers' compensation with 8 minutes left in our time.
Actually, we're on 7575, absences without pay.
I'm sorry.
Madam Chair, if that's okay.
No, keep going, I'm following. 7575. We just have a different order here.
Oh, I apologize.
We will go with you. Yeah, keep going, Ms. Vaughn.
Thank you. So 7575 is leave of absences without pay. This is a policy that we have added and pulled together some provisions that were in our policy manual, as well as some language that was in the original 7510 sample policy from the School Boards Association. We've basically laid out the process for an employee to request discretionary leave for up to a year if they need to request that sort of leave. The employee would provide written notice of 60 days is what we are requesting. And the employee would have to request that both to their supervisor and to the Assistant Superintendent for Human Resources. It does have in this policy that in determining the length of leave, we would take into consideration the welfare of students as well as what the employee's needs may be. The superintendent or designee is able to require the employee to give notice of their intent to return as that leave time period is working through. And once an employee requests that discretionary leave without pay, and those dates are set, they can't change it unless the school system and the employee agree to change that time period. The second section in B here deals with leave to teach at a charter, regional, or lab school. Our current policy talks about employees taking leave to teach at a charter school. We've added in here the lab school and the regional school That was provided in the School Boards Association policy, and it's also provided in our statutes. And so we've just laid out the time periods that employees are able to request to teach in those schools, making it clear that an employee would need to provide any such request 45 days before they would have to report. If it's to their school, 45 days prior to their reporting. If it's the initial year of a charter school or regional school or a lab school, if it's something beyond the initial year of that charter school, then or regional school or lab school, the employee would need to provide notice within 90 days prior to their regular reporting day. Employees, if they wanted to extend this sort of leave, they'd have to come to the board to be able to extend that leave or to duplicate that leave. Yes, ma'am.
So we had a question on this one.
Why do we have leave for a charter school?
Required by statute.
It's statutory.
That's why I looked at the chair, I was like, I bet somebody's making us do it.
Yeah, that's in the statutory. All three of those are in the statutes.
Okay.
Okay. And we've had it in our handbook for a while for our employees to know.
Can we just write per statute?
I just said it was better when I could see it.
I know.
We can write per
Can we add
statute.
in with a mandatory meeting with the superintendent? I'm just kidding.
Let's give it
That's how it works.
Bill, we're being drafted right now.
Yeah, right. We should.
Yes, we'll add in the statutory reference.
No, it's fine. It's at the bottom.
I actually think it's a good idea.
Yeah.
And then the other part here is a provision which appears to be unique to our district, which is leave for teachers on loan. This is for teachers to be able to take a year off to go and work at DPI and to submit their requests for that. It's only available to teachers who have already achieved career status, or one of the changes that we've added in is for teachers who are already on a 4-year contract. But those teachers would be able to request time to go work at DPI for a year. They have to have been employed with the school system for 5 consecutive years, and they have to make a request if they want to extend leave for those circumstances. I'm not sure how often that has happened, or if that's something that is occurring very much right now, but it's something that is in our current policy as well. Yes. Upon adopting this policy, we would be deleting 3800 section 9.6 in our old policy manual.
Aside from questions about statute, which are for a whole different governing body, are there other questions? Do we have a motion to adopt 7575, or rather to send it to first reading? Second. Motion from Mr. Hershey, second from Ms. Edmonds. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay. What's next, Ms. Hill?
Next is policy 7633. This is a policy related to workers' compensation. You all may know that we originally planned for this to be a policy within our leave policies, but as we continue to review and make sure we're organizing things well, we decided to align this with a section already in the School Boards Association policy manual that deals with return to work from workers' compensation. So we put the workers' compensation policy as well as the episode of violence policy connected to that policy in the School Boards Association, which I believe is 7635, which we'll be bringing to you at a later date. So right now, the workers' compensation policy, it pretty much tracks or is similar to the information in the DPI manual with a couple of things specific to us, but this makes it clear in Part A that if an employee is injured on the job, they need to notify their their supervisor immediately. Sorry, Dr. Taylor. And provide a statement of injury within 24 hours of the injury. That's something we do to help the employees so that they can get treatment as soon as possible, and we can cover any medical expenses and other things related to that treatment as soon as possible. Section B of the policy manual makes it clear that in the first 7 days of an injury, it is a waiting period that is not covered by workers' compensation pay, and so the employee has the option to use paid leave during that time or to use non-paid leave during that time of a 7-day waiting period. Once an employee, Section C talks about once an employee is receiving workers' compensation benefits, they are able to supplement those benefits with their leave time so that they have a full time period. You all may recall that workers' compensation pays 66 2/3 of an employee's salary as calculated from the last 12 months. Taxes are not taken out of workers' compensation, but it is 66 2/3. But employees are able to use their leave to supplement for the rest of that time period that's covered by workers' compensation leave. And so they can use sick leave, which is what is most often used. They also, our old policy also permitted employees to use annual leave, as well as if they cannot otherwise use annual leave, they can request that their annual leave be used for catastrophic illness to supplement their benefits. So an employee has to just provide written request to use a supplemental leave to go with their workers' compensation. That is pretty much that.
Any questions on workers' compensation?
Upon approval, this would remove section policy 3800, section 9.2 in our current manual. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Hershey?
Motion to move to first reading.
Second. We have a motion from Mr. Hershey, a second from Ms. Caulfield for policy 7633, workers' compensation. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. All right, so it is 5:01. Let's stop here. You got one more?
She does. She does. I was like, she only has one.
Oh, well, then let's.
And now my
we start to. Oh, now that you've played, yeah.
We didn't start till 3:15.
Oh, that's true. We don't start till 3:15.
And it's mostly statutory.
It's almost all statutory.
We have a little bit of our own. Okay, I'll fly right through. Policy 7634, AJ has me on the clock. Policy 7634 is our episode of violence policy. This is to reflect the rights that employees have to seek an episode of violence claim if that is the basis of a workplace injury. As you all know, we provide information to you with regard to episode of violence claims that we have received, and we give a quarterly update related to that. Employees are entitled to a to their full salary rather than, for example, receiving the workers' compensation. They get their full salary up to 1 year, the lesser of 1 year of the continuation of the disability or the time during which the employee is unable to engage in their employment. Employees are supposed to provide notice, which includes the request for episode of violence, EOV is what we call it, the date that the event occurred, and a detailed description of the circumstances that led to the injury. Section C here talks about a change that we made in our local policy to allow staff to approve episode of violence claims and provide a quarterly report to the board of those approval. If the staff recommends a denial of an episode of violence claim, then that will come to the board for the board to make a decision with regard to that claim. And the final thing is that and the decision about an episode of violence claim must be issued within 30 days of receiving of the application. Once this is adopted, it would replace section 9.3 of policy 3800 in the old manual.
Sorry, I will make it quick. In A, eligibility, am I reading it right that the shortest of periods, 1 year, the continuation of disability, so if 1 year comes and that staff member cannot report back, does that end?
Then they shift back to workers' compensation
Correct, they get-
benefits at that time.
Right.
Oh, I see.
So 1 year would be the longest that they would be able to receive this. Then they would shift back to workers' compensation at that time.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Haggerty and then Dr. Ames.
Under review of requests for benefits, we have language, the superintendent or designee of the board, et cetera, must issue a decision within 30 days of receiving the completed application for benefits. What happens if the review is not completed within the 30 days?
So this comes from statute. We've added this in because it is in statutory language. The statute does not include any sort of repercussions for not doing that, but that gives us a guideline, and our efforts will be to make sure that we meet those requirements. But there is not anything that's laid out in terms of what happens if we miss that time period.
Appealable if you miss the deadline, or is there any other
Industrial.
policy that?
So there are appeals available to the Industrial
Industrial
Commission if we don't, for example, if there is a denial of an episode of violence claim. I'm not sure that there's an appeal, or if someone would appeal if we miss the 30-day deadline, but there are appeals that we have seen if there's been a denial of that. And an employee, just for your information, has a year to request this, so it can go back in time.
Dr. Ng?
Just to clarify, does it have to be on site in a WCPSS facility, or let's say somebody's traveling, does that apply as well for an employee during their work time?
So generally, it would be, as workers' compensation would be, when the employee is, under their responsibility, under the work responsibilities for the school system.
So even if they're off-site, it would still apply?
Yeah, that's
During the
still-
course of employment.
Right, during the course of employment. Thank you, Neil. I'm sorry.
Mr. Hershey?
Motion to move the first reading.
All right, we have a motion from Mr. Hershey to move policy 7634 to first reading. Second from Ms. Johnson-Hostler. Any other comments, questions? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. All right, just so we know what's coming up, and this doesn't include any migration pieces that are in there, but based on what we've talked about, in June, we're going to talk about meal prices and settlements. August, we anticipate talking about the student code of conduct pertaining to harassment and bullying, as well as technology and responsible use. And then I anticipate in September, October, given the discussion we had, we will see sustainability back, but I want to give Dr. Crane enough time to process all that we've done, and I'm saying September, October we'll see where we're at.
And we're also transitioning to full time.
In August.
What did you say, technology responsible use?
In August, technology and responsible use. So get your pagers ready. Yeah.
Thank you for that update to get the forecast. That's helpful. When we do move to the new time, are we moving the other meeting back as well? Because sometimes we do back-to-back.
I think.
I haven't heard anything about moving into the meeting.
No, because I think executive, it backs up to executive.
So that's so much greater.
So there's only 3 board members on executive, so that could leave us laboring for hours waiting for the next one.
If you're on both committees,
I will leave that to the chair.
Could we swap executive and move the policy meetings, the committee meetings back to back?
yeah, what executives are on Tuesdays.
It's on Tuesdays.
We'll figure it out.
Yeah.
Call me
All
or
right.
email me and we'll talk about that.
All right. With that, we are adjourned. Thank you all very much.